If freak-offs and thousands of bottles of baby oil has captured your attention lately, it's because at the core of those lawsuits is an alleged violation of the Mann Act. But do you know the history of the Mann Act and how it ties to some of the romances that took place throughout Black history? Well, before I tell you that, let's start with introductions. Welcome back. I'm Ashley, your favorite raconteuse of I'll Tell You What, the podcast that's all love Black history. Now, I know it's been a while, but we're back, I promise. And there's a little bit of news. We're going to do it a little bit differently this time. I'll Tell You What airs every Monday and Thursday on the Tube of You and wherever you get your podcasts. And if that is not enough love Black history for you, follow us on Patreon for even more. Yes, all week long. But today we're going to uncover the origins and the impact of the Mann Act, which was a law that you might not have heard of, but it's one that has definitely left quite a mark on American history. So the Mann Act, also known as the White Slave Traffic Act, was passed in 1910. Initially, it aimed to combat the trafficking of women and girls for, quote, immoral purposes, specifically prostitution. You have to know that when I say women and girls, for the most part, I mean women and girls of the white variety. These laws, by large, were not created to protect anyone else back then. So the ambiguity in the term immoral purposes gave authorities the range to use the law however they wanted. Over the years, this law became a tool to pursue individuals based on race, gender, and social status. The Mann Act gave law enforcement a very convenient way to target people, more specifically prominent Black men. Now, those men were the ones that were more prone to be seen with white women, as being with someone white was usually a symbol of status, like I've arrived. Let's first explore one of the earliest and more significant cases where the Mann Act was used to bring down a cultural figure, boxer Jack Johnson. First, have you heard of Jack Johnson? Jack became the first American heavyweight boxing champion in 1908. You might have remembered the I'll Tell You What episode about him last year. Because of that made him a trailblazer not only in sports, but in the fight against racial barriers. His victory over white opponents, most notably the Great White Hope, Jim Jeffries in 1910, shook the social order of the time. He was a Black man who didn't just win in the ring, he flaunted his wealth and his many relationships and flings with white women, which obviously angered much of white America. So in 1912, Jack was arrested under the Mann Act. He was accused of transporting a white woman, Lucille Cameron, across state lines for immoral purposes. Lucille was a young sex worker that Jack hired to be his secretary. Once her mom found out that her 18-year-old daughter was entertaining Jack, this big Black man, she called the cops and said that her daughter was kidnapped by him. Yes, like the OG Karen, right? So she said, quote, Jack Johnson has hypnotic powers and he has exercised them on my little girl. I would rather see my daughter spend the rest of her life in an insane asylum than see her the plaything of a... But because there wasn't any evidence that proved that Jack had indeed kidnapped Lucille, those charges were dropped. So Lucille and Jack's relationship continued, and on October 18th, 1912, he was charged again with violating the Mann Act, but this time it went to trial. But not before Jack and Lucille got married. Now, Jack wrote that Lucille proposed to him not just once, but twice, and after that second time, he accepted and they got married on December 4th, 1912. The following May, the trial began. One of the witnesses against Jack was one of his former paramours, a white woman named Belle Schreiber. Now, he met her at a bordello in Chicago years before, and she was always one of his side pieces he kept at the bottom of the roster. Like, he would call her up when all the other girls he would have preferred to have been with were unavailable, or he was upset with. So when the time came to say that this popular boxer was trafficking women around the country, Belle came forward to say, yes, that was true. She also shared that, quote, the reasons I associated with him were mostly financial because I could get lots of clothes and jewelry from him. Now, the all-white jury didn't even deliberate for 2 hours before finding Jack to be guilty to all 7 counts. On June 4th, 1913, he was sentenced to a year and 1 day in federal prison and fined $1,000. He fled the country, though, for several years, but eventually would return back to the United States and began to serve his sentence in September 1920. So as you could tell, the trial and conviction were seen as racially motivated, and another example of how the government wanted black citizens to comply by the fluid laws they created as another means of control. Over a century later, in 2018, former President Donald Trump posthumously pardoned Jack Johnson, acknowledging the racial bias at play in his prosecution. Because broken clocks are still right twice a day, Trump said the day of the pardon, quote, I am taking this very righteous step, I believe, to correct the wrong that occurred in our history and to honor a truly legendary boxing champion. Now let's take a quick break before we take a look at another individual that was impacted by the Mann Act, Chuck Berry. So from where we left off, let's fast forward to the 1950s and we'll find another cultural icon entangled in the Mann Act's web, Chuck Berry, the father of rock and roll. Chuck's music revolutionized the industry, inspiring generations of musicians, as you know. However, his fame didn't protect him from the racial prejudices of the time. In 1959, Chuck was arrested under the Mann Act for transporting a 14-year-old indigenous girl, Janice Escalante, across state lines from Texas to work as a hat check girl at his nightclub in St. Louis or a part of his tour. One of those. The girl, which Jet Magazine described as, quote, mature looking, initially lied about her age and told him she was 21. History.com wrote that after Chuck and Janice had a, quote, falling out, she reported him to the police. In 1960, he was convicted and sentenced to 5 years in prison and a $5,000 fine. However, his first conviction was overturned due to the judge making racist remarks during the trial. And despite this, Chuck was retried and convicted again, serving 20 months in prison. Now, many believe that, like Jack Johnson, Chuck's prosecution was racially motivated, given his status as one of the first black rock stars to achieve mainstream success in a racially segregated America. Law enforcement seemed very eager to take him down at a time where he was at the peak of his career. Take a minute to think about it, and we'll be right back. Now, what do the stories of Jack Johnson and Chuck Berry tell us? They show how the Mann Act, while intended to stop human trafficking, was frequently used as a tool to control and punish prominent black men who saw success and therefore challenge societal norms. Both Jack and Chuck were black men who achieved fame in fields dominated by white men, boxing, and rock music, and their legal troubles under the Mann Act reflected the racial tensions of their respective eras. Now, while the Mann Act is still on the books today, its application has evolved. The law has been amended to clarify its original intent, focusing more on sex trafficking rather than vague immoral purposes. So when you see it used today, the reasons are way more valid than they were many, many decades ago. However, the early use of the Mann Act should remind us all how laws can be weaponized in the service of racial and social control. Now that's it for today's I'll Tell You What. Don't forget to follow us everywhere, subscribe on the Tube of View, leave a review, and come back for another episode on Thursday. And join us on Patreon to support the show and for more Love Black History. I'll see y'all in the pews.